Questions orales or questions? We're gonna have
the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. The protests, the violent protests in Montreal are the consequence of a Prime Minister who, for 9 years, has promoted woke, toxic, divisive identity politics that divides Canadians according to race, sex, vaccination status, etc. And along with dividing Canadians, he's erasing our history. He's allowing terrorists and criminals to come into our country. What's the result? 251 more hate crimes. When will he allow us to have an election so that we can fix what he has broken? The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, and let me be very clear. What was on display in Montreal just this past weekend was criminality. The violence, the hatred, and the anti-Semitism that took place in Montreal is completely unacceptable, and everyone in this House must condemn it in the strongest possible terms.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The lawless hate riot that we saw in the streets of Montreal is what happens after 9 years of a woke Prime Minister pushing radical woke identity politics, dividing people by race, gender, vaccine status, religion, and more. On top of dividing, he erases our heroes and history, saying Canada has no core identity. He opened the borders to terrorists and lawbreakers. The results? Assassinations on Canadian soil, firebombings and terrorist attacks against places of worship, 251% more hate crime. It wasn't like this before this Prime Minister and won't be after he's gone. Why not an election so we can fix what he broke?
the Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I personally believe that it is shameful that anyone would speak of the violence that took place on our streets here in Canada in political terms for purely partisan political intention. Mr. Speaker, I believe it is all of our responsibility to stand up to such hatred and to condemn it in the strongest possible terms, unequivocally and on behalf of all decent Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After 9 years of this Prime Minister, he's doubled the cost of housing and increased the cost of food 37% more quickly in Canada than in the United States. And now he's trying to hide that. He's saying that, you know, you might save 10 cents on a bag of chips, or you might be able to save on Halloween costumes after Halloween's already over, Mr. Speaker. So what has the Bloc got for keeping this Prime Minister in power? Nothing. Nothing for seniors. The leader of the Bloc Québécois, he speaks a big game, but he doesn't play a big game. Why not a carbon tax election so we can get rid of taxes and help people save real money? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, today we can really wonder who talks a lot and who does a lot, because today every member of this House has the right, the obligation to help Canadians, Quebecers, with a bit of help. So my question is, will the Conservative members have the right to vote for their constituents? The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
After doubling housing costs and inflating food prices 37% faster in Canada than in the United States, with inflationary carbon taxes and deficit spending, the Prime Minister now has a tiny 2-month tax trick that will save you 10 cents on a pack of chips, save you a few pennies on a Christmas tree, but only after your Christmas tree is already up and decorated. You'll even save on Halloween costumes 2 months after Halloween. Does he really expect Canadians to fall for this tiny tax trick just before he quadruples the carbon tax on heat, homes, gas, and groceries?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm really glad the Leader of the Opposition started by comparing our economic position with the U.S. Because the fact is, in Canada, inflation is lower. In Canada, interest rates are lower. In Canada, deficits are lower. And in Canada, the public debt is lower. Let's stop talking Canada down. And when it comes to supporting Canadians, what I want to know is, will Conservative MPs be allowed to offer a tax break to their constituents? I know their constituents want it. That's what we're hearing from everyone.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this from a minister who, after finding out that the economy is entering its 6th consecutive quarter of shrinking per capita GDP, that's income per person, down, while the American income per person is up. After she learned that there are 2 million people lined up at food banks, 38% more chronic homelessness, 1,400 homeless encampments in Ontario after 9 years of this government, she says we're not in a recession. We're in a vibe session, she says. So what's her message to people who are hungry and homeless after 9 years of her government? They just need to get with the vibe?
Exactly.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, my message to the Leader of the Conservatives is to be a little more economically literate. I guess he didn't look at the recent GDP revisions, the upward revisions in GDP that show a good result for Canada in per capita GDP. They also show that Canada has not had a recession, contrary to the predictions of many when we saw the COVID recession. We have had a soft landing. That's something to celebrate.
Go ahead.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, allow me to remind you that the Bloc Québécois' useless measures, apparently, when it came to supply management and seniors, well, the young man who leads the Conservative Party, he voted in favour of those. However, when it comes to purchasing power in Quebec and Canada, there are measures that have been proposed, and there are measures that are going to be accessible to millionaires, and checks are going to be sent to people who, you know, have high revenue, $150,000. Does the government not realize that it's abandoning those who really need help with these measures?
Go ahead, Vice Premier Ministre.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I take the Bloc Québécois' concerns very seriously when it comes to our seniors, and I take them seriously because our government shares those concerns. That is why our government has supported seniors across Canada more than any other federal government. This year, Canadian seniors will get $48 billion in support from the federal government. And that's fair, because they deserve it. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, the calculation that you have to make is the one that people are making at home. Those who are between 65 and 74 years old in particular, whose purchasing power has not gotten any better for years now, and who are subject to discrimination, and who don't have access to the vote-buying checks coming from the Liberal government. But listen, I don't understand how the Liberals supported the NDP to support them on this. I'd like to know how. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to start by clarifying one detail, and that's that I know that there are many seniors who are still working, and those who work will get the checks. I also want to say that I think that we all understand that seniors who are 75 years old and older are more vulnerable. They need more assistance, and that is why our government knows that we need to give them more support.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
You know what's cruel? The $250 check that's going out in spring, this Liberal government is excluding seniors, people living with disabilities, and people who just started working. What a slap in the face. Why is this Liberal government excluding the most vulnerable in our country?
Before the Honourable Minister responds, I'm just going to ask members, please, to not take the floor unless they're recognized, so that everyone can hear the question. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the NDP leader for his question, and I hope he and all members of this House will help work with us to unblock this Parliament and to get the support to Canadians that they need and deserve. When it comes to the Working Canadians rebate, we know that there are hardworking people across the country who have been through challenging times, and we know that now is the time to provide them with that extra support. I hope all MPs will join us in doing that.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Workers desperately need help, like seniors, persons with disabilities, and young people who've just got their first job, and yet this government is excluding them from the $250 payment. This is a slap in the face. Can the Liberals explain to the most vulnerable Canadians why they're not supporting them? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to thank the Leader of the NDP for his question. And I hope that he and all members of this House will help us sincerely help Canadians. Our government understands the importance of supporting the most vulnerable, and that's what we've done starting in 2015, and we will continue to do that. Today, we understand that Canada's workers need help, and we are going to help them. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
The NDP leader is giving Canadians whiplash with his latest flip-flop and the flop on the flip. First, he said he tore up his deal with the Liberal government. Then he said that he had taped it back together because they had signed on to his 2-month tax trick. Now he rises on his feet to say that the trick is a rip-off of seniors and persons with disabilities. So then why won't he put his actions where his words are and vote for a carbon tax election so Canadians can choose between this 2-month trick and axing the tax for good?
It will be of no surprise I'm going to ask the Honourable Member from New Westminster Burnaby, please, not to take the floor unless recognized by the Speaker. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the only inconstant flip-flopper in this House is the Leader of the Official Opposition. For months, he has been talking about how Canadians need a little more support. But it turns out that unless you recite robotically his Dr. Seuss rhymes, he's not going to agree with your approach to helping Canadians. Now is the chance for him and his MPs to actually give Canadians some real support. Let's get together.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
The streets of a major Canadian city were set on fire this weekend, and the Prime Minister was nowhere to be found. A radical, anti-Semitic, anti-Canadian mob burned cars, smashed windows, assaulted police officers, and the Prime Minister was nowhere to be found. It took him until noon the next day, and he offered the most basic platitudes resembling some standard condemnation that he's been offering after fomenting the hatred that he's now surprised about. So I have one question. When was the Prime Minister told about the riot, and why did he decide to keep dancing the night away?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague, the Minister of Defence, I think properly explained the outrage that all Canadians felt at this wanton, reckless violence on the streets of Montreal. Mr. Speaker, we condemn unequivocally the rising and concerning rates of anti-Semitism and all other hate crimes in the country. We're working with provincial authorities, local police to combat this. And let me be very clear, Mr. Speaker, no matter what group you claim to represent or what cause you're advancing. If you're smashing windows and assaulting Canadians, you're a criminal and you'll face the full consequences of the law.
Again, I'm going to ask the member from Calgary. I'm going to ask the member from Calgary, Signal Hill, please, not to take the floor unless recognized by the chair.
The honourable member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. The pictures from the riots in Montreal have gone around the world, and it's shameful. We are reaping what the Prime Minister has sowed with his woke, divisive policies. He divided people by race, gender, religion, region, age, wealth, and so on and so forth. And as a result, we've lost control of our borders. We've let criminals come into Canada. Chaos has come in with them. Why is the Prime Minister dancing while Montreal burns? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, I'll say again in French what I've just said in English. Our government, in every instance, condemns the acts of violence and the criminal acts that we saw on the streets of Montreal. It's completely unacceptable to put forward a political point of view by destroying Canadians' property, by committing assault, by attacking police officers. You're not demonstrating peacefully. In those cases, you are a criminal and you'll face justice. The honourable member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. And yet, Mr. Speaker, for this Prime Minister, it's not enough that Hamas representatives are burning our city senators. He's opened our borders to terrorists and criminals, and he's called anyone who's questioned his policies a racist. Despite the Conservatives' demands to put the Islamic Revolutionary Guard on the list of terrorist entities, he's let them operate legally here for years, and now he's letting Hamas representatives destroy our cities. Why did the Prime Minister choose to dance when he knew that Montreal was burning? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, the RCMP is continuing to work in close cooperation with the good work that was done by the police service in Montreal. At all times, the RCMP supports its partners, whether that be in Montreal or in other regions of the country. We have criticized, and we will continue to criticize, the increase of anti-Semitic acts and hate speech acts in Canada, and we will remain focused on the support that we can give the forces of law and order, something that the Conservatives can't say.
The honourable member from Durham.
Mr. Speaker, for years, these Liberals have engaged in woke virtue signaling. They have promoted a hollow and superficial understanding of morality, more concerned with appearances than doing what's right. And Canadians clearly saw the consequences of Liberal ideology over the weekend in Montreal when hate-fueled attacks overtook the cities. The Prime Minister is partying while Canadian cities are suffering. So I ask, why was the Prime Minister dancing while Montreal was burning?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for that question, because all Canadians in this House and all Canadians around the country detest and render unacceptable what we saw in the streets of Montreal. That kind of violence, that kind of unlawful behaviour, that kind of anti-Semitism is unacceptable and will never be countenanced. While we're talking about the fight against anti-Semitism, I will just put it to that member that we have legislation on the floor of this chamber that will take the ban on willful promotion of anti-Semitism and accentuate the penalties, taking them from 2 to 5 years. Will the member support that bill? It's called Bill C-63. It targets online radicalization, which is the root cause of what we're seeing.
The honourable member for Durham.
This Liberal Justice Minister, just like his boss, the Prime Minister, refuses to take any responsibility for creating the conditions that led to what we saw in Montreal just a couple of days ago. It's this Liberal Justice Minister's DEI criminal justice policies that have allowed crime to go unchecked in our cities. It's this Liberal Justice Minister that won't lift a finger to do anything about the violence targeting religious communities in Canada. The Prime Minister is the problem. The Liberal Justice Minister is the problem. So I ask again, when will the Prime Minister stop dancing and address crime in our cities?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I reject that out of hand. What I would say on this side of the House is that what we are doing is we are working to ease tensions in our communities. We are looking at the statistics on hate crimes. We're seeking to address them. What is the proof positive? When I announced the Bill C-63 in this chamber, who was standing by my side, Mr. Speaker? The people that were standing by my side included the Center for Jewish and Israeli Affairs. Why? Because they know you don't get a Pittsburgh Tree of Life synagogue attack unless you're radicalized online. Radicalization online is causing anti-Semitism. It is what we will combat through this bill, through every measure on this side of the House.
It's the internet.
Before I give the floor to the Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly, I would like to...
Members, especially colleagues, I'd like to remind members, including the member from Durham who had asked the question, to please not take the floor to listen to the answer that he had just asked.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, I was going to ask the Minister of Finance what went through her head when it came to giving tax breaks to people who in theory could be millionaires, or $250 checks to people who are making $150,000. But here I'm struck. Is it possible that they're taking us out on for a ride and that the government doesn't actually have the support of the NDP? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I sincerely hope that we will have the support of every member of this House, because I know that there are things that divide us, but I think that all of us believes that we need to support the middle class across the country. So yes, I hope that the NDP will vote in favor of these measures. I also hope that the Bloc will vote in favor of them, and I hope that our colleagues from the Conservative Party will vote in favor as well. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. If the minister wants the support of people who have a certain conscience for social justice, and that does exclude some people in this House, why is the discussion of our bill to help seniors that they voted in favor of been dropped, and why are they not lowering the cap for those who are getting the checks to help those who really deserve it get it? You know, seniors. Why aren't they doing that? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, we agree with the leader of the Bloc Québécois and with all members of this House who believe that we need to help the most vulnerable, who think that we need to help our seniors. We completely agree on that. And that's why our government has added a considerable amount of money in support for our most vulnerable seniors. That's the right thing to do, and that's what we've done. The Honourable Member for Shefford. The federal government is letting retirees down, according to the FADUC. They've already denounced the Liberals' refusal to offer fair old age pensions to all seniors, and now they're furious to see them handing out $250 checks to just about anybody who's earning taxable income up to $150,000 a year, except for retirees. Not a penny for them, not even for those who depend on the guaranteed income supplement that Liberals, had promised to increase. So the Liberals promised to help less affluent retirees. How can they so ridiculously abandon them now? It's shameful. The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Two things. First of all, no federal government has ever done more for seniors than this Liberal government since 2015, and that's one of the reasons why the poverty rate for seniors has gone down by 20% since 2015. Second, if we had listened to the Conservatives, who unfortunately are often supported by the Bloc Québécois, we wouldn't have lowered the OAS threshold level to 65 years old. That would mean that there'd be 100,000 seniors in Canada, including many in Quebec, who would be in poverty right now, Mr. Speaker, if we'd listen to them.
The honourable member from Cumberland Colchester.
The word kakistocracy translated means government by the worst, most incompetent or most unscrupulous citizens. I can't think of a better description for this NDP Liberal government. There have been 27 reported cases of scurvy in Saskatchewan, and the Salvation Army has reported that over 1/4 of parents are skipping meals so their children can eat. Canadians are malnourished and suffering, and what do we get from this government? A quadrupling of the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre. When will the Prime Minister finally show some courage and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, it's a shame that members would speak to each other in that kind of way. I believe that every member within their heart is here because they wish to serve their communities. And you know, I take a look at Canada, which the average number of years the Canadians spend in health is 6 years longer than the United States, 2 years longer than the United Kingdom, 1 year longer than France and Italy. We have the second highest only to Japan. The model they would choose would be to push us deeper into mental health and attack our health system. Mr. Speaker, that's not a direction we will follow.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member from Cumberland Colchester.
Speaker, under that Liberal minister, 7 million Canadians don't have access to primary care, and malnutrition mayhem reigns supreme. 2 million Canadians visiting food banks, 40,000 of them being Nova Scotian, and of those 12,000 being children. And scurvy. Can it get any worse, Mr. Speaker? And how does this NDP Liberal Reunited Costly Coalition think they're going to address food bank use and scurvy? Well, of course, as I mentioned, they want to quadruple the carbon tax. I'll ask again, when will the Prime Minister let Canadians decide if they want the madness to continue, and will they call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, their solution to food insecurity would be to take away a rebate check that they get to gives them more money in their pocket to be able to afford the necessities of life. Their solution to food insecurity would be to cut a school food program that makes sure that kids get the food they need. They would cut dental care. The reality is, I sat in opposition and I watched the Conservative Party when they were in government. I'll tell you, at that period of time, the amount of action they took for vulnerable people was exactly zero. So for now, they're talking about what vulnerable people need, but they're not putting forward any solutions to actually help them.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member from Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, the cost of living crisis is having a major impact on family grocery budgets. Yet the Liberal answer is to continue hiking the carbon tax, making food even more expensive. Under NDP Liberals, we're seeing the largest annual increase in child poverty on record. 1 in 4 parents are cutting back their food to feed their kids, and 1 in 5 children are now living in poverty due to the NDP Liberals government. That's nearly 1.4 million children. Enough is enough. Will the Prime Minister give Canadians a choice and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I have a great deal of respect for the MP from Fort McMurray, and that's why I'd like to ask her and all of her colleagues, who I believe sincerely do care about Canadian families, to join us in supporting Canadian families. And here's how they can do it. Vote for a GST rebate over the holidays. That would mean no GST on diapers, no GST on kids' clothes, no GST on that prepared food, maybe rotisserie chicken, that a hardworking mom wants to pick up after work to feed her kids. That is real support we can all deliver in a couple of weeks.
The honourable member from Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Seniors and persons with disabilities are hardest hit by rising costs driven by unchecked corporate greed because they live on fixed incomes and already struggle to pay for medication and groceries. Yet the Liberals excluded them from their planned $250 rebate. We know Conservatives cut supports Canadians need, and these Liberals always let people down. Will the government get real, reverse this cruel and callous decision and ensure seniors and persons with disabilities also get the relief they need.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Labour and Seniors.
Thank you, Speaker. This government has done more for seniors than any other government. First thing that we did was roll back the retirement age from 67 to 65, taking 100,000 seniors out of poverty. We increased the GIS by $1,000, taking nearly 1 million seniors out of poverty. We increased the OAS for the most vulnerable seniors. And yes, we are doing a tax break for all Canadians, including seniors. So I ask everyone in this House to stand up for seniors and to vote for our tax breaks for all Canadians.
Order. The Honourable Member from Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have failed to deliver on their $10 a day childcare by allowing provinces to continue to pay childcare workers inadequate wages, causing labour shortages and long wait lists for families. A recent report by the Centre for Future Work has said that $10 a day childcare improves affordability for families and has allowed more women to return to work. What's stalling it? The Liberals won't put in place a workforce strategy. Will the government answer their calls, put in place a workforce strategy, and give childcare centres and workers the support they need?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, since rolling out the Canada-wide early learning and childcare system, we've seen over 1 million children benefit from this affordable care. But as this member points out, more work needs to be done to ensure that the workforce is well supported. Later this week, I'll have the opportunity to meet with all ministers responsible for early learning and childcare at the provincial and territorial level, where we will discuss the work that's underway to make sure that early childhood workers are well compensated and well respected.
The Honourable Member for St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker, last week our government announced new measures to put more money back in the pockets of Canadians to help them afford the things they need and save for the things they want. Unfortunately, some on the other side of the aisle have the wrong impression about the measures, like the Member of Parliament for Central Okanagan, Nicola, who described it as sending people pennies. Could the Minister please educate the member opposite on what the measures actually mean?
The Honourable Minister, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I would really like to thank my colleague for her question and her hard work for her constituents and the people of Canada. We believe that when Canadians need a helping hand, the government should be there. That's why last week we announced that we're giving Canadians across the country a tax break. That means essentials like groceries, snacks, and kids' clothing and diapers will be tax-free. And working Canadians will get some cash back with the Working Canadians rebate. This will help Canadians across the country, including Canadians in St. John's East and across the great province of Newfoundland and Labrador.
The Honourable Member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
While this unserious Prime Minister shakes it off in a vibe session, Montreal burned and the Canadian economy is crippled. I mean, this is the guy who doesn't think about monetary policy. He thinks that budgets balance themselves and that the economy has nothing to do with numbers. And now he says he'll let bankers worry about the economy. That's why Canadians are in a GDP per person decline over the last 2 years. But that's okay, as long as his banker buddies, the elitists, the rich guys like Carbon Tax Carney get paid. Call a carbon tax election now so common sense Conservatives can fix the budget.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I would urge the member opposite to take a look at the GDP revisions from StatsCan. Those were revisions upward that showed real strength of the Canadian economy in our recovery from the COVID recession. I'd also like to urge him and everyone in this House to stop talking Canada down. Inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range for 10 months. Interest rates have come down 4 times in a row, and we have the lowest debt and deficit in the G7. Now's the time to help Canadians Canadians a little bit, and the Conservatives can do that by voting for
The honourable member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
Answer clearly shows the minister's economic illiteracy. As GDP per person has gone down, that means Canadians are getting poorer. And nobody loves this Liberal NDP Prime Minister more than the U.S. He drove our jobs, our investment, our business to the U.S. and now Canada is poorer than Alabama. That's why more than 2 million Canadians are in a food bank in a single month, and 1 in 4 Canadians are skipping meals. Instead of letting bankers worry about the economy, call a carbon tax election now, so common sense Conservatives can fix the budget and this country.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as I say, I really urge the member opposite and all Conservatives to consult those GDP revisions, including their impact on GDP per capita. They will see we have had a strong economic recovery with inflation down and interest rates down. And that's why now is the time to give Canadians a little bit of extra help. With a GST break over the holidays and a rebate for working Canadians. And that is what the Conservatives should support us in offering to Canadians. It's really astonishing to me that they refuse to do that.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, I will let the bankers worry about the economy. You'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy. The budget will balance itself. These are the actual words of the Prime Minister of Canada. Given his complete disinterest in managing the economy, no one should be surprised that GDP per person has declined in 8 of the last 9 quarters. Mr. Speaker, it's time for a common-sense Conservative Prime Minister who will fix the budget, fight inflation, restore the promise of Canada. When will the Prime Minister finally give Canadians a say and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
A working class Canadian voting for these Conservatives would be like a chicken voting for Colonel Sanders, Mr. Speaker. Think about it. We want to build an economy that works for everybody. When we raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% to cut them for 9 million Canadians in the middle class, they oppose those measures. When we stop sending childcare checks to millionaires to put more money in the pockets of 9 out of 10 Canadian families, they voted against it. Now we are proposing to cut taxes on household items that are going to help families and workers in this country. Yet again, they oppose it. I urge my colleague to drop the talking points, get over the stickers in caucus with whatever he's about to read, and get on with supporting households.
The honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
I urge the member to get on with Canadians' business and call a carbon tax election. After 9 years, according to the Economist, Canada is now poorer than Alabama, the 4th poorest state in the U.S. While this Liberal government drives our economy further and further in the ditch with excessive taxation and regulation, the Canadian economy falls further and further behind while the American economy roars ahead. When will this government get out of the way and allow us to restore the promise of Canada by calling a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
It is like we are playing bingo here, the number of slogans that are being read off when people can't take their eyes off the sheet. Listen to this, is from an article recently. Conservatives talking about their own leader. If you repeat the slogans, you get rewarded. You are celebrated in front of caucus for being a good cheerleader. The difference between us and them, I don't have to hold it.
Minister, start from the top this time, please. No interruptions.
Mr. Speaker, the difference between the Liberals and Conservatives in question period, I don't need to have my notes in front of me to actually speak in the House. Mr. Speaker, they are being rewarded in caucus when they repeat the slogans in this House, not when they defend their communities at home. The honourable member won't even admit that his community would be better off receiving money for housing. He stands up and votes against measures once and twice and 3 times to deny tax breaks to families in his community. We are going to be here to support working families. I wish for once the Conservatives would join us.
The honourable member for Beauport, Limoilou. On Saturday, the Journal de Montreal asked how Ottawa could hire 43% more public servants and still be so bad at serving its citizens. Imagine, despite hiring 110,000 civil servants, we've had a housing crisis and immigration is a mess, and it's even worse at the CRA. And the answer is that the Liberals spend their time creating new programs to interfere in health, housing, and so on. Do they realize that by meddling in Quebec's affairs, they've lost control of their own responsibilities?
The Honourable Minister,
The Honourable Minister.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the vast improvement in government services that have taken place over the last year. We could start with passports. Service improvements have gone across the country, and that's despite the fact that 2 years ago we were delivering 3.4 million passports. This year we're delivering up to 5.7 million passports. You can now get 10-day passports in the territories. There's a new processing center in BC, and soon you'll be able to get passports online, so you'll never have to wait in line again.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. The Journal de Montreal doesn't even reveal the full extent of the federal bureaucratic fiasco, because while the public service has ballooned by 43%, the use of subcontractors has also exploded. In addition to a loss of control within its own bureaucracy, resulting in service breakdowns for citizens, there's also a loss of control outside the bureaucracy, resulting in scandals like ArriveCan. And there's never just one minister in charge. How is it possible to be plunged into a fiasco of this magnitude without anyone being held accountable? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Mr. Speaker, one scandal would obviously forbid the Conservative Party or the Bloc to be opposed to the Canadian dental care plan, because more than 13,000 seniors have received care. And this means several thousand of them were able to go to the dentist for the first time in years. Or other type of dental specialists. No, they voted against. The Conservatives and Bloc voted against these measures, and unfortunately my colleague knows that. The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the weekend, the newspaper headlines read, "Nothing's working at the federal government. It's too big, too fat, and too inefficient." We've been saying this for 9 years, and unfortunately this Liberal government is kept in power by the Bloc Québécois, which supports it and voted in favour of its inefficient spending. It's sad to see Canadians tightening their belts while the Bloc Liberals waste taxpayers' money. When will we have an election so that Quebecers can elect a responsible Conservative government? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Really sad to hear my Conservative colleagues from Quebec be muzzled by their leader. They are not allowed to visit hundreds of affording housable units that are being built in their ridings. These are being hidden by their leader. That's what irresponsibility is. They're unable to defend their communities because their Conservative leader has banned them from talking about affordable housing units being built in their own riding. The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, once again, it shows his incompetency, but this government is abusing its powers and, with its Bloc friends, has managed to stay in power despite a minority government. These two accomplices voted $500 billion in appropriations to waste taxpayers' money. More civil servants and less service. That's the Bloc Liberal coalition. Quebecers have had enough. When will an election be held to choose a real Conservative government that will cut the red tape and the taxes? I hope my colleague understood the question. The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Incompetency, Mr. Speaker. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 affordable housing units. That's all the Conservative leader was able to build across our country throughout his entire mandate. And that's what incompetency is as a definition. We're talking about hundreds of affordable housing units that are built even in his riding. But the bad news is, Mr. Speaker, is that not only is the Conservative leader saying that these units don't exist, but he wants to stop them from being built. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse and Chemin-Lévis. Here are a few newspaper headlines that appeared over the weekend. End of regime turpitudes. This government is buying time on the backs of taxpayers. Will the Bloc Liberal coalition, which voted twice to keep this government in power, finally understand that it's time to stop feeding this federal bureaucratic monster? The Bloc voted for $500 billion in appropriations. I need a simple answer. When can we have an election so Quebecers can finally choose a common-sense Conservative government, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. My colleague, well, does she know the Haute Couture Boulevard in her riding? And there is a housing project to build 100 units in her riding. So when she talks about incompetency, it should be, we were looking at her housing, the opposition leader who says that these units don't exist. The Minister Dranville and others have visited these housing units. When will she invite her leader to go visit them as well?
The Honourable Member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Mr. Speaker, small businesses are the backbone of our communities. They are bouncing back from tough times and gearing up to make this holiday season a success. Restaurants and small businesses in Vaughan and across Canada are counting on a busy Christmas season to kickstart a strong new year. Can the Minister of Small Business tell Canadians how our government is helping small businesses and Canadians through the holiday season?
The Honourable Minister for Small Business.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the member from Vaughan Woodbridge for his tireless advocacy. And I'm glad to say that thanks to our government, Canadians across Canada will get a GST tax break from December 14 to February 15. Restaurants Canada indicated that this is a big win for the restaurant industry. It restores some much-needed hope in the industry, and they're optimistic it will translate to increased spending at local restaurants across the country. This could mean a boost of up to 5% or close to $1 billion in additional revenue. Mr. Speaker, this tax break helps restaurants and small businesses across the country, so let's support local, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan and St. Paul.
The Winnipeg law enforcement community is reeling from a violent incident last night where an officer was stabbed in the neck. Thankfully, he's in stable condition, but this is the reality faced by our brave police officers every single day. In fact, in Toronto, 637 police officers have been injured on the job just this year alone. It's no wonder with a 50% rise in violent crime, which is 200,000 additional violent crime incidents each year compared to 2015. When are the Liberals going to finally wake up and support our police and do something about this?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what our government does. It supports police doing this dangerous and difficult work across the country. I was briefed on the incidents in Winnipeg. I share the Honourable Member's relief that the officer is expected to recover. Mr. Speaker, these are exactly the kind of incidents that should make all members of this House support in a nonpartisan way the important work that police forces do in every corner of the country. We've reversed Conservative cuts to border services in the RCMP. We support local and provincial police, and we'll continue to do exactly that.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government often blames the provincial courts, for example, for the crime wave we're seeing across this country. But of course, the provincial courts are governed by the law, and the Liberals changed the law with Bill C-75, which made bail the default for violent repeat offenders. And the results are clear. 116% increase of gun crime in Canada, 50% increase of violent crime, 200,000 additional violent crime incidents each year since 2015 under their watch. Mr. Speaker, how many more people are going to have to get hurt before they realize it's their policies that have caused all this destruction?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Speaker, a couple of points of clarification. First of all, bail reform was asked for 18 months ago. We delivered bail reform. What we asked for subsequently is we asked for provinces, including that member's province, to provide us with data and information. In fact, the province of Manitoba has supplied us with that information. They are working diligently to improve the number of police officers, to improve the number of crowns, to think about how JPs are trained, and to ensure detention facilities are available to receive individuals. We're not seeing that across the country. We're certainly not seeing that in the province of Ontario. That's where the complementary piece of the administration of justice at the provincial level needs to happen.
The Honourable Member from Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Liberal NDP government, crime is up. Soft on crime policies like their catch and release bail failures have led to a 50% increase in violent crime. Last night, a police officer in Winnipeg was stabbed in the throat, but thankfully that officer is in stable condition. However, this situation should never have happened in the first place. Liberals' hug-a-thug approach to crime is making an already dangerous job increasingly unsafe and more challenging. How many more police officers and victims must suffer before these Liberals start prioritizing public safety?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
I want to reiterate my support for what the Winnipeg police officers do and what every police officer does around this country to keep all of our communities safe. That's the first point. The second point that I want to reiterate is that we're actually seeing declining numbers of law enforcement officers in municipalities right around the country. I can speak most directly to my own town of Toronto. There are currently 700 fewer officers on the beat in Toronto than there were when the Minister of Defence was the Chief of Police. We need to ensure the municipalities and provinces are stepping up to complement the work we are doing with the criminal code to keep our communities safe. That means officers, that means crowns, that means JPs and detention facilities.
The Honourable Member from Newmarket, Aurora.
Mr. Speaker, the school food programs are growing in Ontario. With our new agreement with the Ontario government, the National School Food Program will now support kids in Newmarket, Aurora, and across Ontario with healthy meals, building a foundation for their well-being and success. Can the Minister of Families, Children, and Social Development share how this program is helping families save money and make sure that kids receive nutritious meals?
Great question.
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children, and Social Development.
Well, great news. Last week, Ontario signed on, and this school year, more than 160,000 kids will receive food at school here in Ontario, thanks to the National School Food Program. This will save an average family of four about $800 in groceries, Mr. Speaker. The president of Ontario's Public School Board said, "This funding will have tremendous impact on school communities and family budgets." We're helping kids in school, Mr. Speaker, while the Conservatives would cut this.
The Honourable Member for Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, every day it's more clear that the Liberals' air passenger regulations are letting people down. And now we learn the Canadian Transportation Agency is creeping around online forums trying to catch air passengers who are sharing their experience. So on the one side, we've got the rich airlines backed by the best lawyers and lobbyists, and on the other side, Canadian families struggling to navigate this government's botched complaint process. Will the minister immediately stop government online surveillance of air passengers in Canada?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, our government was the first to protect the rights of passengers starting in 2019. Mr. Speaker, the air passenger protection regulations are there to protect passengers and their families, and we expect all airlines to follow these rules. Mr. Speaker, we're going to be relentless in working with the airlines to ensure, once again, that they are looking after their passengers as well as the families of those passengers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, with $4.7 billion, this government could have cut chronic homelessness across the country in half and had $1.2 billion to spare. Instead, they want to throw it at a pre-election vote-buying scheme right out of Doug Ford's playbook. Worst of all, like always, people with disabilities unable to work and already living in poverty are left out entirely. Do people with disabilities mean so little to this government, they aren't even trying to buy their votes anymore?
The Honourable Minister for Diversity, Inclusion and People with Disabilities.
Mr. Speaker, no other government has done more to support seniors and persons with disabilities than this Liberal government. Mr. Speaker, whether it is through dental care program that is going to help 9 million Canadians, or the Canada Disability Benefit, or by increasing seniors' pension, Mr. Speaker, the GST-HST tax break is yet another measure to support Canadians' families, Mr. Speaker, and our Working Canadians rebate is going to support more than 18 million working Canadians to get that $250 check in April. This is good news, Mr. Speaker. Let's get it done.